Hi folks, I'm Jack Kennedy and welcome to the second edition of a new initiative from the Irish Farmers Journal called Farm Tech Talk. At the outset, I need to acknowledge the support of our NUA, FBD and MSD to support this outside broadcast. Our intention is to create what we hope to be kind of an engaging venture to share information with farmers in this time when there's very little discussion groups, when there's not as many meetings going on, and when you're not beating your farming colleagues. A lot of what we will be trying to discuss will be the key issues in the Farmers Journal. So I want to try and get behind some of the opinions, some of the features in the Farmers Journal, and talk about the issues that are happening on the ground around rural Ireland. I mean, obviously this week, the ongoing coronavirus situation continues to dominate. And I'm joined in our first session here by Justin McCarthy, the editor of the Farmers Journal, our market specialist, Phelim O'Neill, and our news editor, Caitriona Morrissey. Phelim, if I was to pull to you first in terms of this week, we saw the voluntary closure of a number of fast food outlets around Ireland. Can you summarise why that's important, I suppose, or is it important?
It's very important, Jack. It's not just Ireland that they've closed in, they've closed across Europe and the UK. And to put that in some sort of context on how important it is, the UK consumes between 4 and 5 times as much Irish beef as we do at home. So the food service sector, the burger chains, are one of the major routes to market. And once that's closed, it is a major disruption to the supply chain. Now, we do have the retail outlets and they have compensated to some extent, but it has to be fair to say that this is one of the biggest hits that Irish beef and indeed the other products from the agri-food industry, such as dairy going into the coffee chains, it is a big hit.
Okay, Phelim, so while I hear you, there's still a lot of commentary and you hear people saying that, people are not going to stop eating, that it's not all that negative. What do you say to when someone says something like that?
And that's a fair point, Jack, but I suppose the reality is we're in a time, uncharted territory, because it's the issue here is actually getting product to consumers. And one big route is open, that's through the retail sector and indeed butchers throughout Ireland. But the problem is for the rest of society, the bit that like half of all food consumption was out of the home eating. And now that that's gone, that does mean a big opportunity to market the product is gone with it.
I mean, despite the negativity, in your column this week, you kind of point to some positives in terms of the trade with America, with the US, and I suppose shoots of recovery in China. Are you grasping at green shoots there, or are they real?
Well, we have to be optimistic because at the end of the day, consumers still want to buy the product. This is a crisis. This is a human health crisis. In the past, we've had problems in our industry with animal diseases such as foot and mouth. We had an issue with BSE that affected trade. None of this has anything to do with the product that's coming off Irish farms. It is about getting the route to the market. And in the case of exports, and I'm trying to be positive about this, I think the challenge here is, can we grow sales sufficiently through the retail sector that will offset the loss that we have from the food service sector? Can this be the opportunity to reinvigorate the market for roast beef, for example? Can we use the steak opportunity for families to dine on now coming into the warmer spring season? You also mentioned there about export potential. Irish exports to the US this year are running more than twice the level of where they were last year. Okay, that's coming from a very low start. And maybe most importantly of all, China, they have had their experience over the end of December, January and February when that market was seriously disrupted. It was operating at about 30% of capacity. The Chinese demand for beef imports this year will be even bigger than it was last year. Every year is a new record with it. And as they are slowly getting back to normal, and now that most of Irish beef factories are approved to export there, I think there's an opportunity that we will see making a real impact on our market here in about 4 to 6 weeks from now. That market will be hopefully back to some sort of normality. Irish factories will be in a position to grow the business. I'm not saying that we will be able to swap over from doing the food service sector in the UK, that China will take everything and will be all right. But it is a very positive opportunity that we didn't have this time last year, and one I think that we can develop. And that's what gives me some hope for the sector in the difficult days and weeks that lie ahead.
Okay, I hear you. It's a period of transition. We come back to you. I mean, Caitriona and Justin, maybe uh, just to jump to the two of you, or Caitriona, I'll go to Caitriona first in terms of Caitriona. I mean, you brightened up the life of many people with your collage of photos on the front page this week and the large strap line, "We can do this." You get the feeling there's a real national effort at play on this one.
Yeah, I think that's why we went for the front cover that we did this week. There's an awful lot of bad news there for the public and for farmers, but at the same time, we have the chance to change how this goes, and that's where we went with the front cover, was to say, right, let's do this. Let's put our shoulder to the wheel and let's everybody follow the instructions, and that will minimize the disruption, I suppose. We have seen huge disruption already, but it is in all of our hands to make sure this doesn't get any bigger.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the disruption. I mean, you've pages full of postponements and cancellations. I mean, do we know the real impact of these closures and postponements on rural Ireland?
Yeah, some of them are very visible. In my local co-op in Dairygold, they started with the click and call and collect system. That's been in place in Glanbia since Monday. So that's changing how farmers go in. You can no longer just go into the co-op and get your fence posts or your fertilizer. You have to ring ahead and get your order in and then collect it. That's all to minimize the person-to-person contact. I think we'll see that rolled out by other co-ops over the coming days, because it makes sense. It's a way of being able to continue your farm work, but at the same time reducing that person-to-person distance.
Again, another feature you have this week is you've an article on a relatively young man, 36 years of age, and that the virus hit him very hard, and he was I suppose he had to stay in bed for a couple of days. Then on the phone last night, I was talking to someone, and they had their father, who actually got the virus as well, but he was 74 years of age, and it didn't impact on him as much. It's unusual how the virus can kind of affect one person over another in a different way.
Yeah, and I suppose the main message to take from that is neither the older man nor the younger man were immune to it. We're all susceptible to it, and a lot of us will get it to varying degrees over the next couple of weeks. But I suppose the HSE advice applies to anybody. If you have the symptoms, you must take action, and the action you must take is to self-isolate. Call your GP and take it from there. They'll either refer you for testing or tell you to stay in the self-isolation for 14 days. So no matter what age or occupation you are, the advice is still the same.
Excellent. Justin, just to come to you, in your editorial this week, you talk about intervention and export refunds, and I wouldn't mind if you could maybe just explain it to me a little bit in terms of intervention, what it means, export refunds, what it means. I mean, I suppose what you're looking at is, how the trade is going to be impacted, but what can be done at policy level, I suppose, to lessen that impact. Could you just kind of briefly explain to me where you were going in the editorial?
I suppose, Jack, look, and again, to all our viewers and readers, what Phelim said there is right. There is a demand still for the product that we are producing. There is disruption to the market infrastructure as to how that product actually gets to our consumers, and it is going to have an impact on beef prices, and it is going to have the impact on beef demand. But it may not be long term, and I suppose what we're calling for today is for the European Commission to take action to help farmers through the next 10 to 12 weeks or however long this may be. Phelim says China's starting to come back onto the market. This may actually be long-term a good news story for the beef sector, but it is going to have to go through a bumpy ride. So how do we get it through that bumpy period? You talk about intervention, and people have mentioned intervention. That basically means the EU buying the product, putting it into storage over the next 3 to 4 months, and then releasing it back out. That's a disaster for the trade, Jack, because unlike dairy products where you can put them in and store them at relatively the same value, the first minute you store beef, you have to freeze it, so you automatically reduce it by 25 to 30%. Then that product has to come back onto the market in 6 months' time. And what does it do? It floods the market with a cheap frozen beef product, which drags down the price farmers are getting for their cattle at a time when beef price and beef demand could actually be quite good. So what we're saying really is the European Commission has a couple of options here in its toolbox under the Common Market Orientation regulations. It can, one, put beef into intervention, buy it off the market, but that should only be an option where they're prepared to put in export refunds, that when that beef actually comes out of the market, we can sell it to third countries at a discounted price. Two, the other option is, and one that we would be urging, is that it invokes a temporary suspension to imports of beef into the European Union, which you can do under exceptional market measures. So a lot of the steak meat that's coming in from South American countries should be paused for a period of 2 years to allow our European markets to rebalance. And one that maybe, Jack, is a bit left of centre, but I think in these current challenges, we need to be trying everything, is to look at fishermen are being encouraged to leave the fish in the sea. Why can we not help farmers leave their cattle in the field? This couldn't have come at a better time in terms of the season. And I know it's never a good time to get a challenge, but in terms of the time of year, the grass is growing at the minute. Could we look at maybe taking 10,000 cattle out of the weekly kill and putting them back out to grass? And I fully accept there's cattle, young bulls there that are on our feeding system that have to stay indoors, and that's different. But there are cattle out there that could go back out to grass over the next 2 to 3 weeks. But to do that, we would urge the European Commission to give farmers the confidence to doing that in the same way as they're considering paying fishermen to leave their fish in the sea, that they would look to guarantee the market for farmers through deficiency payments for the second half of the year, that when those extra cattle that are deferred now into come out onto the market in the second half of the year, that the market has a ceiling. So that would basically mean that the European Commission may come out and guarantee the market at 3.70 cents a kilo, even if the market only paid 3.50, that the European Commission would make up that 20 cent and help protect farmers and give farmers the confidence to hold cattle back during this difficult period, keep them out in grass, rather than killing them at a depressed price and putting them into intervention to depress them even further. I think we need innovative thinking. We need innovative thinking from the Commission, and we need innovative asks from the farm organisations, not just the simple measures of looking to old tools. We need to be looking a bit more innovatively at this problem.
Okay, and I suppose in another article in the journal, I see former Taoiseach John Bruton is talking about kind of innovation in terms of the EU, and I suppose sticking with it really effectively. Like, I mean, he talks about Italy and the problems that they have, and that now is the time not to walk away from Italy, because a lot of other parts of the EU, and he cites Holland and Bavaria, have gained a lot from the EU. And so I mean, there's a huge play going on there in terms of we're I suppose thinking and speaking about Ireland Inc., but there's a lot going on in Europe with this same issue. I mean, how important is European unity at this stage?
I think John has two clear messages, and as you quite rightly say, Jack, one of them is the need for unity across Europe. As single entities, Europe is a very small trading bloc across the various member states. But as a combined, it is a very powerful trading bloc, and it's a very powerful bloc on which to spread the risk over. If you look at the ECB coming out this week and guaranteeing a €750 billion bond buying scheme, which effectively allows governments to buy money at a lower interest rates, no member state could even on its own think of putting together such financial firepower. And I think what John is quite rightly talking about is the need for Europe to stand together and stand shoulder to shoulder. And I also think, Jack, and I know it's a politically sensitive subject to be talking about at this minute, but we should also stand shoulder to shoulder with the UK at this time. And I think John makes a very valid point that Boris Johnson has the mandate, he has the majority within Westminster to be able to put Brexit on pause. There are things, sometimes there's maybe something more important than getting Brexit done. And I think European Union, along with the UK, let's get COVID done first. And then if we want, come back and look at Brexit.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Phelim, I might come back to you in terms of, I suppose, again, some of these kind of shoots of positivity and some of the issues that are happening around the world. I'm not long back from a trade mission with Borbia to Egypt and Algeria. And, I mean, Ramadan and what it means for Irish farmers, some don't understand it. So, I mean, effectively, a country like Egypt, like Algeria, they import huge volumes of live cattle into these African countries because simply they can't breed any animals because they've no resources like land and feed, etc., to grow feed for these cattle. But, I walked onto a farm in Egypt with 2,000 bulls imported from South America that were all being fed to finish for Ramadan. Would you mind explaining, maybe, remind listeners and readers when is Ramadan coming, and I suppose why it's so important and how Ireland plays its part in fulfilling that Ramadan demand?
Well, Jack, Ramadan, it isn't a particularly important feast in Ireland. It's one that is confined to the Muslim faith. And whilst it's observed in Ireland by the Muslim community, they're a very small part of the Irish population. It's not so when you mentioned Egypt there, but as well as Egypt, you have a lot of areas of Africa, Middle East, and indeed a growing population in the UK and the European Union. Ramadan, it's the feast when they go into a period that they cannot eat between dawn and dusk. And the effect of that and why it's of interest and should be of interest to Irish farmers, immediately ahead of Ramadan, they do have, if you like, a bit of a blowout. And that will create a demand for beef. It will create an even bigger demand for sheep meat because it's probably the more popular red meat in the Muslim community. And they go into their period of fasting, and that then is followed by the Feast of the Eid. And it then is the celebration at the end of their period of fasting. And if you were to make I suppose, an equivalence in the Christian calendar, we're talking about Lent followed by Easter. And after that, then there's a fairly big celebration that runs on for a couple of weeks, and that creates a huge demand for meat, particularly in the sheep meat sector. Something that'll be very welcome, by the way, at the moment, because over the last week, it has been a very, very tough time for sheep farmers getting hoggets sold. There's been a big drop, excuse me, there's been a big drop in the market price there.
Yeah. Caitriona, I mean, Paul Mooney, one of your journalists on the news desk, like, I mean, he has a couple of articles and has had a couple of articles over the last number of weeks talking about, I suppose, the live exports and, you know, how they have increased as a result of trying to feed that Ramadan demand. It looks to be, I suppose, that there is a little bit of activity in that export market for it to kind of try and meet that Ramadan demand.
Yeah, that's right. Paul this week is looking forward, I suppose, to the next boat that is coming, and that will be a boat to be loaded with bulls for Algeria. And alongside that, I suppose, on the live export front, the export of calves from this country, mainly to Holland for veal, went very well last week after a few hiccups the week before. So yeah, the trade is moving at the minute, and that's obviously very welcome because it reduces the number of animals here, and it also gives competition in the marketplace for farmers who are selling.
Again, Caitriona, one of the standout articles for me, I suppose, this week was your question and answer around the whole coronavirus piece with your readers, and where you answered the questions in terms of the queries that were thrown at you. I mean, if I was to throw a couple of very quick ones at you, I mean, it's a very busy times on farm at this time of the year. There's lots going on. There's fertilizer, there's cattle going in and out, there's, you know, sheep going in and out. Everything's happening, I suppose, at the moment. Is this social and physical distancing practical on busy farms?
It is not easy, but it has to be done, I suppose, is the answer. It is about thinking about what you're doing. So we have guidance from the Department of Agriculture. If you have TB testing, that the vet is well aware of the practices that they must do to try and minimize minimize the personal contact and maximize the distance between people on the farm. There's some very easy ways you can do it. You know, get your feed delivered. There's absolutely no need to meet the delivery man. When your milk is collected, there's no need to meet the milk driver. You should already have the facilities in place for him to wash, and they have their own protocols from the co-ops about what to do. And then it's a matter of kind of thinking, right, I normally meet the contractor. Maybe I don't need to meet the contractor. Maybe I can give him a call and tell him it's field A, B, C, or D, and have the gates open for him so that he doesn't have to be, handling things on your farm as much as they normally would. So look, it's not what we're used to, but it is something we're going to have to do.
Another query, Caitriona. I mean, if someone in a household if a farmer gets the virus, like, I mean, how does he self-isolate in his own house, or should he self-isolate in his own house?
Yeah, this was a question we've been asked multiple times in the last week, and there is a little bit of confusion, I think, sometimes between the social distancing and self-isolation. So social distancing is the things we've talked about, just keeping your distance, keeping that minimum 2 meters away from everybody, and reducing the number of people that you have to meet on a day. Self-isolation is a step up, and that is if you have any of the symptoms, which is the fever, the cough, and the symptoms that are well known at this stage. If you show any of those, the HSE advice is to go into self-isolation. Self-isolation is going into a room and not having contact with anybody else. So pick your bedroom, for example, and you will have minimal access to the rest of your household. So you shouldn't be having breakfast with them in the morning. Try and have your meals separately, ideally in the room that you're self-isolating in. And, you'll have to have people help you do that. So, maybe get the dinner to the room that you're self-isolating in. That's not to say that you have to stay in the room 24/7. You can go outside, you can go for a walk in the garden, you can go out to the yard. Make sure you don't meet anybody while you're doing that, and minimize the amount of things that you maybe touch along the way and whatnot. And the other advice is just to not share a bathroom where you can. If you have 2 separate bathrooms, one for the rest of the family, one for the person who's self-isolating. If that's not possible, then the person who's self-isolating should use the bathroom last and make sure it's cleaned afterwards.
Okay. Some very practical tips and steps there. Justin, to throw one at you. I mean, again, we saw the closure of marts this week, and so effectively, as we speak here today on Friday, the gates are locked and they can't be used. I mean, should there be a facility available to use these marts for some stock movement or for transfer of stock, like we'll say, while the marts remain closed to the public?
I think first of all, Jack, we have to acknowledge we can't expect NFIT to, when it was deciding to close marts in their entirety, to fully understand the complexity of moving livestock. But I think, as I said in page 2, there's a real onus now in the Department of Agriculture to get in front of NFIT and talk to them about the other services. And I think the critical services are the movement of stock, the security of payment, the putting buyers and sellers in touch, and overall overseeing the movement of livestock. And I think that is critically important. The marts are the lifeblood of our sector. They're going to have to change how they do business. I do think they can offer a wide range of services to the farming community whilst respecting the need to protect public health. And I would expect that we will see positive engagement on that and positive announcements on that, if not today, perhaps over the weekend, to allow some marts to become more engaged in what is a critical period for moving cattle at the minute.
Okay, folks. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to talk to us today in terms of the issues that have featured in the Farmers Journal. I mean, there's no doubt we are farming in exceptional times, and if there's one take-home message from the front page of the journal right through to the back, it's to look after yourself both mentally and physically in terms of what's happening on your farm at this very busy time of the year. We'll be talking to the livestock team next, so stay tuned if you're interested in the livestock scene and what's happening on dairy, beef and sheep farms across the country. But for the moment, thanks to Justin, Phelim and Caitriona for taking time out of their busy schedules. And again, thanks to Ornua, FBD and MSD for the support to help make this outside broadcast happen. Prevention is better than cure. Stay away from each other and stay farming.